All right, I guess we can go ahead and get started. So welcome to the exclusive SafeGraph Spend launch event. We're really excited to have you here. We're joined today by Michael Taylor, product manager at SafeGraph, and Matt Felton, president and founder of DataStory. And they're going to walk through what SafeGraph Spend is, different ways to use it, and you'll even see an interactive demo. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom right of the Zoom screen. You can ask any questions about the product itself or anything that the speakers are showing, and we'll be happy to get to that at the end. So with that, I will kick it off to Michael.
All right. Thanks, Brianna. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We are very excited to be here. And special thanks to Matt and DataStory for helping us introduce our newest product, our aggregated transaction offering known as SafeGraph Spend. So we think of Spend as kind of a fourth pillar in our suite of products. And as a quick overview for those less familiar with SafeGraph, we are just a data company. And what that means is that we focus all of our energy on high quality, reliable places data. For us, a place is anywhere on the globe with a location. Restaurants, stores, malls, libraries, hospitals, distribution centers, bus stops, national parks, you name it, the list goes on. And as part of our core places offering, we capture and deliver highly accurate details about these locations, including name, address, geocoordinates, industry, brand affiliation, open close dates, and more. As I said, these places span the globe, and they make up the rows in our database. And then where applicable, we have other products that we add on additional columns to provide even more detail and context. So our geometry offering includes actual POI polygons, so point of interest polygons, along with metadata about how these places are physically related to each other. Our patterns data sets, a layer mobility data on top of our polygons to help us understand foot traffic and consumer behavior at the individual POI level. And now we are layering spend on to provide more context into how consumers are spending money at these individual locations. So what exactly is spend? To create this product, we're ingesting a large panel of debit and credit card transactions from thousands of financial institutions in the United States. Of course, all transactions are consumer permissioned and de-identified to preserve privacy. But transaction data itself isn't exactly new. What's really unique about SafeGraph Spend is that we're able to parse through those transactions and associate them with an individual place, given our expertise in places data. So we're not just providing analytics on an individual company or a zip code. We're looking to this specific store at 123 Main Street, hometown, USA. So this allows for the maximum amount of granularity and thus flexibility in your analysis. You can see how specific stores are performing over time within a brand or across brands, within an industry or across industries, within a city or across cities. And of course, you can still build up from these stores to get regional or national levels of aggregation as well. Now, what does the product actually look like? Well, it looks a lot like data, seeing as we are a data company. The rows are individual places. The columns are the relevant metrics for the place for the given period of time. We'll deliver a CSV to your cloud provider of choice with the relevant data. The geographies you're interested in, the industries you're interested in, the brands you're interested in, you tell us. And we update our data set once a month. And during those updates, we not only generate the new numbers for the new time frame, right? So the new metrics for the new month, but we're also adding new places. We're constantly adding to our offering, constantly getting better at associating transactions to individual places. So even if something isn't available one month, there's a good chance it might be in the next month. And we're actually really good at receiving feedback. But what you're looking at here on the slide on the right-hand side is just a snippet of some of the fields. You can see we include the raw totals for the amount of spend that we're seeing, the number of transactions, the number of unique customers. But we also go on to provide median transaction size broken up a few different ways. We bucket spending by income, customer frequency, day of the week, even online versus in-store. And so for that last one, what we mean by that is you can understand the popularity of, say, like in-store pickup orders at a given Target or online deliveries from a particular restaurant. But the list of individual fields is too long to cover right now in detail. But as always, for any of our products, our schemas and our formats are publicly available on our website. But it's a lot more fun to look at graphics than it is to talk about spreadsheets. So let's take a look at some of the analysis that can be done with spend. Here are 3 scenarios that can easily play out with aggregated transactions down to the individual POI level. We can take a look at a single Starbucks and see how it's been doing over time. We can ring fence a particular region within a city, or really anywhere on a map, but maybe the business district or a certain neighborhood. And what's nice is that I can easily define who counts as being part of this district, right? So for example, I can choose to remove that location on the far right-hand side of that middle map, right towards the end of that cone there, because I might deem it to be too far away or not representative of the analysis that I'm trying to run. And then on that far right-hand side, maybe I just go for the entire city of Seattle. Maybe I want to create a heat map for sales growth and understand where people are doing better. The point being that the level of aggregation is really up to you. And what that means is you can actually dig into situations like this one. So we're looking at 2 coffee shops, at most 2 blocks apart, but 2 very different tales. So one had a very strong month-over-month growth, both in store and with online pickup orders. The other is trending in the opposite direction. Also note the store trending up is getting nearly twice as much per transaction, $10 to $5 per card swipe. Why? What are they doing differently? Is there an easy way to explain the disparity? I'd say at the very least, it deserves some investigation in case it somehow uncovers some variable required for a successful store. And again, these don't need to be the same brand or ticker like they are here. They could be competing stores. It could be a Dunkin' and a Pete's, or it could be a Nordstrom and a Macy's. And they definitely don't need to be in the same zip code or the same city. You could choose similar stores on 2 different college campuses to compare and contrast, or 50 different college campuses, or all the ice cream shops within walking distance of a beach. The key being is you don't need first-party data to necessarily run the analysis, and that analysis can happen on exactly the set of locations you need. So here's a couple of different cuts. On the left, the dispersion of transaction values across a given brand. In this case, McDonald's. So these are the median purchases for all McDonald's in the United States. As you might expect, a normal curve, but here it becomes easier to spot outliers and perhaps trends over time, which means I can hone in on those outliers to better understand either over or under performance. Or to the right, the average transaction value across the US fast food industry, broken out by state. Certainly some of that ranking by median transaction is due to local prices and cost of living. You can see my home state of California or somewhere like Hawaii, typically at the top. But perhaps there's something to be found in a market that doesn't land where you'd expect. Personally, I'm surprised by some of the names at the top of that list that aren't California, Hawaii, and Alaska. Perhaps more QSRs should look to those states for spending potential. Now, sure, you can keep cutting data this way and that way, but analytics are only as good as the quality of the inputs. So we know it's important to vet the reliability of the underlying data and the panel we're using to derive these metrics. So first off, we see on average more than $4.5 billion in aggregated spend each month across over 120 million transactions. Again, both debit and credit cards, all tied back to individual places. But more so than that, we want to make sure that the data set's representative, not just necessarily large. So we, on our own, compared our aggregated spend to the reported revenues of some publicly traded companies and found strong results. So you can see here the correlation to McDonald's revenue in the US over time. The correlation is almost 0.9, and it looks really good through each time period. Or say for Chipotle, where they actually publicly report their in-store versus delivery breakdown, we saw correlations of over 0.75 to the online spend against our online spend column. So you can read more about these investigations in the blog that we posted on the topic. That's available on our website. We also published a collab notebook on quantifying sampling bias. So we took a look at our geographic distribution across the entire United States and provided a lot of detail as to our analysis and our measurement. That's also publicly available on our website, provides great detail on what we looked at and how we did it. But spoiler alert is that the overall average skew per state is less than 1%. All right, so I've been talking a lot about the data itself and some targeted scenarios, but I want to take a minute to level up and highlight how valuable this can be to some key workflows across some different industries. And I'll quickly run through some examples before handing it over to Matt so that he can show you how MapDash can bring this data to life for this kind of analysis. But first up, looking at here, competitive intelligence. So most stores have their own first-party data for measuring store performance at their stores. I would certainly hope so. But what about how the store across the street is doing? That information won't be available in the next quarterly earnings report, but it could be available next month in spend. So you can understand how much is being spent overall in a given area and how much of it you are seeing land on your books. You can look at the average purchase size for the city block or for the entire city and see how you stack up. Keep tabs on trends to see if competitors are responding well to the push to online spending. See if they happen to be partnering with certain intermediaries to perform those online services, like DoorDash for online restaurant deliveries. And yes, that's actually a column I haven't even touched on to this point, but we do track intermediary involvement where possible. Think DoorDash, Uber Eats, PayPal, etc. The key, again, of all of this being that the type of detail may be available elsewhere with a lot less granularity, say the ticker level, or from the competitors themselves, if they're public and in their financial reports, but obviously at a substantial lag. And again, with a lot less level of granularity. Here, we can actually choose exactly what we want to look at and get it with a relatively high frequency. All right, next up, retail analytics. And this is pretty wide ranging. Could be consumer packaged goods or distributions, could be commercial real estate, obviously could be any kind of retail. But Spend allows for the kind of custom analysis necessary for true performance measurement. So know how the stores in and around your targets or in and around your target locations are performing. So is that your own portfolio of properties, your distribution partners, or again, even your competitors? So is consumer activity moving with or against the broader trends? Are customers returning frequently to make purchases? And are those returning customers spending more, making larger purchases versus the ones showing up for the first time? Is it all as frequent as a site elsewhere, either across town or in a different district, different zip code, different city? Has the surge of online spending helped or hurt the businesses that you work with? And how can this knowledge, help you with future acquisitions or for future partnerships? Whether it's for your own portfolio of, say, commercial real estate or looking to add to your distribution network. Ad placement and campaign planning. So again, while we don't have any PII and thus won't be tying anything to cards or devices, aggregated consumer spending can help strategically target areas that are ripe for certain advertising campaigns. So where are people spending a lot of money in similar stores or at similar brands that align with your target outcomes? Look at the trends over time. Maybe try and spot a potential up and coming area, places that may not have maybe reached a certain threshold, but are very much trending in that direction. Where is there a lot of market share to be gained? Where are there loyal customers who commonly frequent the same places over and over? Can their change in frequency be measured over time? We certainly can give it a shot. Did a well-placed campaign show signs of decline in competitor loyalty, even if you maybe didn't necessarily see it on your end? All of this can be derived from POI profiling to provide more context around the people and their movements who are ultimately the audiences for these advertisements. And last, but certainly not least, site selection. So in a sense, it's a combination of everything I just covered. You can use real consumer spending behavior to help understand where your businesses should and shouldn't be operating. Measure spending potential based on similar stores. Understand your competitors' performance and know where you can target loyal customers. Spend can be a key ingredient in this mix. And obviously paired with our own places data, maybe you could even see underserved areas on a map, which is certainly something that Data Story knows a lot about. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt now so we can see spend data in action.
Excellent. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate the opportunity to share this launch with SafeGraph. And by way of introduction, Data Story is a company that helps businesses leverage location intelligence and do so in a way that takes the complex combination of technology and data science and data and brings it together into a very actionable and meaningful and useful format for those that are making decisions, whether in business or in nonprofits or government that are in business decision-making environments. And we're always looking for the best practices, the best technology, the best data. And that's where SafeGraph has come in for us many times over the years, most recently with spend data. On the next slide, you'll see what the vehicle through which we deliver our location intelligence is an application called MapDash. It's a web-based software as a service that allows somebody to log in and have access to a wealth of different data sets. Over the years, one of the things that we're always pulling from best in breed data sources, but this notion of spend at a location has been rather elusive. And that's why it's been a real delight to work with the spend data of late and look at it down at a very geographically precise level and see it and how it intermingles with other, certainly other SafeGraph data we work with, but other demographics and other lifestyles and other sources. MapDash has about 170 layers we've curated in and put at our users' fingertips, and it's got reporting and some very easily accessible ways to get at location intelligence. So on the next slide, before we I'm going to jump into a live demo, but I want to underscore an important principle in the work that we do, and that is that context matters in a really big way. I want you to consider this image that you're looking at here and wonder what it might be. It's beautiful, I think. Is it the inside of a church? Is it the inside of a store? Is it a penthouse suite waiting for some furniture? We don't really know, but if we give it a greater context, if we zoom the lens out a little bit, go ahead. We see that it's the inside of a guitar. And some of you might have known that because, well, you might know the inside of guitars. But for those that don't inherently know the inside of guitars, the context around what that is makes a big difference. And just as spend data on its own is beautiful, is wonderful, is incredibly valuable, it's made even more valuable when put in context and in a greater environment. That's what we do with data. That's what MapDash does for our users. So on the next slide, before we get into the live demonstration, I just want to point out this is what the data looks like when we start with it. It is a lot of data. SafeGraph's a data company, and the way they organize it is very useful for us to parse it and synthesize it. And what I'm going to walk you through is how we take that enormous and valuable amount of data and visualize it in meaningful ways, put it into context, analyze it, and then present it in some ways that can be socialized or shared with others. So with that, I'm going to share screen and walk you through live here a little introduction to MapDash. So you should be seeing my screen. We all good, Michael?
All good.
Excellent. All right, so this is MapDash. It's an interactive map, and what you're seeing here, let me light up the legend. You're seeing a subset of hardware retailers. Now, this case study is based on a true story. It's based on many true stories, and we wanted to show you an example of what we do from a market expansion, market development. But as Michael indicated, you certainly can imagine marketing implications. You could imagine other kind of operational and merchandising considerations with this. But let's imagine that we're interested in entering this market of Charlotte, and we have a new concept, and we want to look at the competitive landscape. Well, we don't know what sales are of the competitors, but we can learn a lot from spend. And so the colors you see on the map here represent the brand. If I, of course, tap on any one of these, you see that there's data behind it. This is not just a map, right? It's a database presented as a map and visualized. And so this is one element of the data that we see here. And because all of this data is behind what we're visualizing, we can do a number of things to make this more intuitively insightful. First thing here is looking at the median spend per customer. So we can see these blue Lowe's and orange Home Depots and green Tractor Supply Co. and look at what that median spend per customer is. Instantly, when I look at this, I see that there's a suburban story. There's a suburban story that the further out you are from the core of Charlotte, the greater the median spend is. There's other ways we can look at this data. We could look at it from a year-over-year growth standpoint. Here, the greener and larger the dot is, the higher the year-over-year growth is. So we can see this Tractor Supply Co. 205% growth. Down here, here's a Lowe's 33% growth in the same month last year. There's many different ways to roll up and synthesize this data. And this is just looking straight up at year over year. We can look at, Michael indicated there's the spending online. So we could create a visualization where here the size of the dot represents that total spend. And the more yellow that you see, the more influence of yellow, the more there is an online spend. And if I'm interested in marketing or understanding, can I put a brick and mortar store in, or is this more of an online presence? This kind of insight is going to help me understand what's going on currently in the market. And the last example of a visualization is taking the slices of days of the week. There's many ways to slice this data. Here we're representing what is the predominant day that sales are happening. And not surprisingly, in hardware, we see this red represents Monday. Contractors, others are getting their supplies on a Monday and they're working throughout the week. But notice there's some blue. Blue is Tuesday. We've got Thursday and midweek down here. So if we wanted to and had time, we could get very curious and look in on each of these different examples. But what I'd like to draw your attention to is how we can begin to analyze where we might want to be in this market. Now, I'm going to go back to an example here, and let's just look at the Home Depot and their presence within the market. Now, I can, of course, filter this. There's tools within MapDash to filter it, or we can pre-filter a layer. And there's a particular analysis that we run all the time called a trade web analysis to measure area of nearest influence and attraction based on geography. And I can see that, and I could layer in from MapDash. I mentioned 170 plus layers. There's tons of other data that's queued up to be able to layer on top of this map. And I just want to start with showing something like household income. Let me turn our legend back on here. So the bluer the area, the higher the income. And I can now look at what's the relationship between the median customer spend and the incomes in the area. Darker blues are higher areas, right? I could click on this and see a little bit of that detail if I want. I can also roll up in a more aggregated way. What's the median income for that entire trade web area? And I can tell you Home Depot is interesting in this market. Let me turn on, by contrast, what Lowe's looks like. And there's a greater presence of Lowe's in this market. And if I summarize up that income, what you notice is that there's appears to be a great correlation, which of course we could measure between the overall income, dark blues, and large median spend. And so the darker the blue of the market, the higher the median spend. And that's what we might expect. But remember, with that Home Depot, wasn't what we would expect. So if I'm managing that store, I'm curious about what merch to put in what stores, in what markets, and maybe what time of year, because we could do that. Now, if again, I'm interested, where do I want to be? I noticed this area here around Shuffletown as I was preparing this particular demo. And one of the reasons I noticed it is because when we turn on these areas of greatest influence, where the lines come together is the farthest area of influence. So these lines are coming together, they're far from existing Lowe's. I could do the same if I turn on Home Depot, and I see this convergence in this area that we're going to call Shuffletown. And so let me turn the spend data back on, and then let's look at the context of this. Is this a rural area, or is it populated? Well, if I overlay population density, I can see that Shuffletown, in fact, has these darker colors and a higher population. Is it growing? I could turn on this layer and see that, in fact, it's growing. And for any of these neighborhoods, see the rate at which it's growing. And what we do with MapDash, again, this is the context that's so important, is understanding anything from standard demographics on down to home value that you see here, or when was the house built. There's a dizzying amount of data that can get teed up and help you understand what the opportunity is. Now, if I, one layer that I don't have a lot of time to get into, but it looks at the psychodemographic characteristics. This is from Esri, and we've included it in MapDash. And just suffice it to say that these lifestyles in and around here, we see a lot of this purple and orange and pink. And this represents the people that live near this community. If I click through really quickly, what we see about up and coming families is that they have new homes, they have young families. It's one of the fastest growing markets in the country. I'm interested in capturing those people, but I'm wondering where they're shopping. Well, a quick call out to some other good SafeGraph data. We've incorporated patterns to understand foot traffic in and around the area. And I could tap on this area and see down the road that there's an Ace Hardware with 114 average daily visits, people that stay there 19 minutes. And lo and behold, 27% of those are that lifestyle that might live nearby, but might also be driving from Shuffletown. I could look at the Lowe's up here and see it's purple. It also represents this up and coming families, and see how this store ranks and see the daily trends and the time of day and the day of week. This is the way that this data, whether spend or in this case patterns, can be synthesized and made a little bit more meaningful in the context of what you're seeing here. So the last thing that I want to show you is just this ability to drill in and wonder from a site selection standpoint where we might want to be. If I zoom in really close, I see this dirt sign of new development, and I can see core POIs here, Harris Teeter, Jersey Mike's. I see signs of new development, and I see what those are. And if I want to understand what my potential is in a given area, I can simply use the study area stats tool in MapDash and drop a pin on that intersection. And maybe we want to look at what a 5 or 10, or let's just go with a 10-minute drive time looks like. And I see that within 10 minutes, see this squiggly area, we're not yet reaching any of these other nearby stores. This is shaping up to be a really prime location. But if I want to understand in a quantitative way what is within 10 minutes, I can ask MapDash to tell me that. And this particular report doesn't include spend data, but it can, and we do. This example just doesn't have that. But what you see is that within 10 minutes, we're quantifying the total population, the 40% of these up and coming families, age, education, age of housing, owner occupied. If I'm in hardware retail, so I care about the businesses, I can click through and see that this area has 10% of the businesses are in the construction industry, which is higher than the county. This site suddenly becomes very interesting, and I can print this off and I can push it onto my real estate committee or my marketing strategy team, et cetera. So spend becomes a useful addition in the stack of all of this data. The last thing I do want to show you back to spend is this notion that if we've decided we want to go to Shuffletown, I can simply select that irregular shape like you saw Michael show in his slides and look at it and understand with this, what are some of the statistics about the spend data that we have here? What is the median spend per transaction? And I'm able to see that that's 30 to 55 transaction or dollar amounts with an average of 39. I can open this up in a table or export it out to a CSV. So very dynamic when you have great data in a great context with an interactive environment that you can make some very highly tuned decisions based upon location intelligence. With that, I will stop sharing and hand it back to you, Michael.
All right. Great, thanks, Matt. I love those demos. Just digging around in different places with all the types of data. So very, very illuminating. I think, like Matt said, spend is a tremendous ingredient into what is always a larger picture. It's a kind of a metaphor, a mantra at SafeGraph. We know a lot of what we're providing is just a piece, but we want to make sure that it's a premium piece and a very valuable piece. So just for all of you that have questions, I know there are a lot of questions. I've seen plenty of them in the Q&A and the chat. We'll take some here for sure, but would very much encourage those of you who are interested in what you saw today, especially from a spend perspective, you can schedule a demo with us online at our website. Happy to walk you through it live. We also have a free sample of our data available up there as well. So just a small snippet of spend data for a few stores across a couple of different areas, just so that people can get a feel for like what an actual data element looks like. So we very much encourage you to reach out. We're very excited to talk about spend. And again, very thankful for Matt for joining us today and taking us through that great tour. And with that, I'll say thank you. We very, very much appreciate your time. We know everybody's busy. Thank you for joining us today. And again, just let us know if you'd like to know anything more about spend.
Awesome. Yeah, we've gotten a lot of questions, so I guess we can just dive right in and answer as many as we possibly can in the time left. So there's been some questions around the historical nature of the data, like how far it goes back, and then also any timestamps associated to it. So could you just provide some more info around the time aspect of the data?
Sure. So like I said, it's a monthly cadence, right? So we're updating it monthly. The timestamps that we provide cover the month that just ended, and we have columns that highlight the date range and the date start. Yes, we have historical data. Right now, we have it calculated back through 2020. Spend is a very new product. You guys probably saw the press release was all of 2 weeks ago. So we're taking that kind of base set and working with our customers, our current customers, working with our prospects to understand like what the most meaningful like schema is here. We want to let that schema kind of settle and make sure there's not a column there that we're missing. Once we feel like it is settled, we can absolutely backfill it farther than 2020, on the order of like 10 years or something like that. We'll have to see where the market demand is, where people want us to take it, but we definitely can go backwards for sure.
And then another related question is, are there any plans to make the data more granular in terms of time, like to the week or day?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, a lot of it's going to come from the demand. So we obviously we have transactions, we have them down to, we break it up within the day for the provider or for the metrics that we currently provide. So if we see demand for it, yeah, we absolutely can start to consider cutting it up at a more granular rate. Weekly is probably as granular as we get. But yeah, I mean, we do patterns weekly. We could consider doing spend weekly.
Cool. Okay. And then a lot of questions about the panel. So specifically, do we know what the split between credit or debit cards is?
Yeah, great question. The panel does skew towards debit, and it ranges depending on the state. So, some states are 60-ish% debit, 40% credit. Others can go quite a bit higher. So I would say depending on workflows and depending on what you're interested in, we could hone in on exactly the given geography, but do note on average, the panel does skew towards debit.
And is there any skew towards particular credit card provider or kind of across the board?
Pretty much across the board, as far as we can tell. Happy to dig in with any like specific questions for people that do have those questions, but we see data from thousands of financial institutions. So it is very broadly based. It's not like from one Visa or MasterCard or something like that.
Okay, awesome. And then there were some questions about the graph that you showed earlier on with the correlation between quarterly earnings reports. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And even though they weren't exactly the same, like what the correlation means and how that can be used to interpret the data?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, with any panel approach, like there's no way to see all of the transactions. I'm unaware of a source that has all of the transactions. If anyone knows one, let us know. So taking the panel and just assuming that you are seeing a piece of what is occurring, the best thing that you can do is understand the confidence that you have in the piece that you are seeing and the kind of the analysis or the assumptions that you can make based on that input. So looking at, say, like the McDonald's example, which was the chart that I had up there, 0.9 correlation is tremendous for a sampling component, right? So with 0.9, I shouldn't say with 0.9% accuracy, but with the piece that we have, we're effectively tracking McDonald's revenue. So like if you want to see in any given portion, sub-region, the South, the North, whatever it might be, like you can feel confident that any derived metrics or analytics that you're running on the panel would faithfully represent McDonald's, because our panel, even just looking at a subset of it, is faithfully tracking what the top line revenue is for the company.
Okay, great. Also, a lot of questions about the geographic coverage of the data, specifically if it's available outside the US, but then also concerning US territories such as Puerto Rico.
Yeah, so it's United States centric for now. We're starting in the United States. It's the largest base of POI that we have, but like our global coverage is expanding. We certainly can consider it outside of the United States. Again, would love to hear needs and use cases for that. But for the United States right now, and the way that we consider it, oftentimes like Puerto Rico falls underneath the United States. So if we have POI and we're seeing credit card transactions that fall into that area, we'll include it. We don't exclude it from like a definition perspective. So that'll be based on like the panel specifically.
Okay, cool. And then also related to the panel. So how can people understand, the data that's coming in here to mean larger trends for just overall, like the entire population, right? Kind of around normalization.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So we do, and this data is available on our website. You can go check out our schema, but we provide we call it a supplementary file that includes information on our panel statistics. So like the number of transactions that we're seeing in any given state, so that you can draw or you can normalize or you can upscale the data based on, say, like state scaling within a given area based on the portion that we're seeing. So you don't have to take just like hey, it's X% of the population, just multiply by, the same thing everywhere. You can actually scale based on area, knowing the size of the panel that we're talking about. So we provide that with each monthly delivery. Very similar to the way we do it for our patterns products as well.
Got it. Also related to just coverage, is this only for publicly available or publicly traded brands, or do you also include smaller brands? Like there were also some questions around farmers markets.
Okay, yeah. So I should clarify. I used brands a lot in that presentation. To SafeGraph, a brand is anywhere that has multiple locations. We technically draw the line at 3. Right. So in our mind, a brand can be anything with more than 3 locations, does not need to be public. The data set we have available right now is based on our brand coverage. It was an obvious starting point for us because part of what we're doing here is parsing these transactions to understand which specific stores, brands with multiple stores are typically better at identifying which specific store we're talking about. So it started with brands. It will not stop with brands. We would expect in the next month or 2, certainly in the very near future, that we'd expand into what we would consider to be long tail. And so that would be non-branded POI, the air quotes mom and pop or SMB or whatever you want to call it, that are more specifically local and typically just one of a kind. As for farmers markets, I would say unlikely, because there isn't necessarily going to be an individual vendor. That's typically a collection of vendors for the people who are actually there at each like individual stall. Okay,
makes sense. All right, bear with me. There's just a ton of questions coming in, which is great. Just keeping track of them all. There are also some questions around the customer home city column. Could you talk a little bit more about that, and if there are plans to roll that up to a larger geography such as CBG? Or smaller, I guess.
Roll it down to smaller, yeah. So currently we're just working on a lot of the input that we're receiving from the panel. Again, we don't we're not seeing the credit card transaction. We don't know who it is. We're just taking with what we can. So we're working at just the city level because it's an easy enough aggregation. And right now we're just providing the count of customers who came from certain cities. If people really want to dig in there, would love to hear about, the need for additional analytics or metrics like median spend by home city or total spend by home city, things of that nature. And then, yes, if we can, we certainly will attempt to continue to get as granular as possible. Highly unlikely we'd ever drop beneath the CVG, similar to the way we do our patterns product. But if we can, at some point in time, try and back it into CVG, we'll give it a shot. But for the moment, sticking with city until we have a more granular layer.
And then could you talk a little bit more about the online, offline purchase attribution?
Yeah. So I know it's interesting to think of online spend in physical places, but the online spend is whenever we can parse a transaction that we recognize as being originated online and then referencing a physical store. So the example I gave in that presentation, right, like a Target, where an online order for pickup in store has both the flavor of online and a physical brick and mortar location. So that is what we're including as online spend. Again, I mentioned the DoorDashes and the Uber Eats of the world. So like similarly, like generated from an app or from online, not in-store swipe, or I should say in-store tap, even at this point in time. Those are what we're considering to be the online purchases. And again, we have to be able to tie them back to an individual store. So if you order something at Target and have it delivered to your house, there's no individual store there, right? So we're excluding those types of transactions and that kind of aggregation from the details we're providing. We're looking to provide a very strong profile around a given individual point of interest.
And then another question about just what the data is reporting based for the transactions. Is it SKU level, like which products, or is it just basket size?
No, it's total card swipe. So just the total amount for each transaction. We don't yet have granularity beneath that.
Okay, thanks. And then a lot of questions just around how we got this data and created the data set in the first place. So if you could talk a little bit more about that, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, so we are working with a provider that has all of this aggregated transaction data across, like I said, thousands of financial institutions. So it's not necessarily the aggregation that we're doing. Like the layer of detail that we're providing is associating the transactions with individual places. There are a few different ways to do that. There's no just one mix that works. Different brands, different stores have very different ways of generating their transaction strings. And even within a brand, right, if you're looking at a Taco Bell or a Burger King or something like that, even within that overarching parent brand, the individual transactions can be widely different. So what we are doing is taking that input data, parsing it, understanding the pieces. If it's as simple as a store ID, fantastic. If it's, name matching or something to that effect, or any of the other metadata that we can, we're doing our best to associate it to a given store. And we have a very high threshold for accuracy on that. So we'd rather not associate a transaction erroneously. We're going to err on the side of being very confident about the actual transactions we attach. So that's where the kind of, I guess you would consider to be our secret sauce. It's not that secret per se. We're very transparent as to what we're doing, but like that is what we are very good at a high level of accuracy, is associating those transactions back to individual POIs.
Okay, perfect. So we're right up on time. I know we didn't get to everybody's question, but we do have, a record of who asked what, so we can follow up with you specifically. Another question though that we got a lot was, how can you access this data? So Michael, if you wouldn't mind actually just showing that one slide that has the URL for the free sample, just to leave everyone with that. But with that, I would just like to thank our presenters, Michael and Matt, for an awesome presentation on spend data and the ways you can use it for various use cases, including site selection. And thank all of the attendees for joining and having a very lively discussion here at the end. It was really tough to keep up with all the Q&A. So thank you for keeping me on my toes. And yes, there is the URL, so you can download a free sample of spend data. And this webinar will be available on demand. So you can keep checking back on our website for that if you would like to watch it again or share with a colleague. Thanks all.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.